from county, including the fire folks, as well as some county supervisors and former Congresswoman. I am Jackie Spears. So that was a great day. We hosted folks in this room and then went out to the Greater Ross Valley Shaded Field Break to talk more about the work going on. And then I also want to note, we have some things that have been added to our website recently. We talked about it last month with this group. However, they weren't live yet. Our goal was to put up a couple of dashboards online for folks to see. I'm going to stop sharing and move to the website so you know where to find it. Okay. I'm going to share again. We have two dashboards that are live right now, and I'm seeing that our homepage is featuring one of them right now, which is exciting. I'm going to show you where to find them online. So if you go to our homepage, go down to goals, objectives, and strategic measures, this is one way to find these dashboards. So if you scroll down to vegetation management, we've got highlighted in bold here a link to our dashboard that highlights where projects are, vegetation management projects are on the landscape, as well as where work has taken place. You can zoom in on any of these zones, these projects, and your acres treated, increase in direct attack acres, which reflects flame length, and overall fire behavior reduction. That's a result of the modeling that we've been working on and the great project implementation reporting that your staff has been doing as they implement projects. So big thank you there. We're able to zoom in on this map and see where projects have been implemented in the field. Now, these are core projects for vegetation management in this particular dashboard. And this is a great way to show the public, elected officials, et cetera, as well as, potential granting agencies where we're doing work on the landscape and how we're moving the needle. There are ways to dig into additional resources for these metrics, et cetera. And we also have a story map. There's a link on the left here. And that provides more of an overview of the vegetation management program. You can scroll through this entire story map, which provides more information, and it's a great resource to share with the public. So I'm going to go back rather than make you dizzy. I'm going to go back to the home page here and show you, or back to the goals and objectives, and show you how to find the other dashboard. So goal 1, vegetation management. We also have a dashboard live for goal 5. If you click here, this is another dashboard to explore in terms of home hardening and defensible space actions. Mark, do you want to add anything on this dashboard?
Kind of the way I've been talking about this particular dashboard is Goal 1's dashboard is a way for us to show our taxpayers what Measure C dollars are doing to create community resiliency. Goal 5 dashboard is a way for the residents to show us what they're doing on their property. They're not entering the data themselves, but when our inspectors go out and inspect the properties, we get the risk rating. Then when the resident goes in and reduces the risk on their property, we get that either through self-reporting, grant reporting, or through re-inspections. And so this dashboard is the residents showing us what they're doing to make their communities resilient. So that's how I've been looking at these two dashboards.
Yeah. Great. So it took a moment for it to load on my laptop because I'm overworking my laptop, but it's a great resource out there that's open to the public and all of you. And we were able to daylight these two dashboards during the task force meeting recently. And so that's the end of my report. Happy to take questions.
Any questions, Fran? Do we need to go to public comment on this? I don't think so.
I think we do.
Alrighty, we'll open it to any public comment if there's nothing here in the chamber.
Any members of the public wishing to speak, please raise your hand at the reaction or press *9 if you are attending by phone. No questions.
No comment. Then we'll move on to consent calendar and specifically the minutes. We'll look for a motion to
Move
approve.
approval.
Second,
Second.
Cusimano, and we'll open it to public comment.
Any members of the public, please raise your hand in the comments or press *9. Still no comment.
Sounds good. And we'll go to approval. And because we have folks online, I believe we have to do a roll call. So if you wouldn't mind.
Bolinas Fire District,
Aye.
City of Centerville,
Yes.
Kentfield Fire,
Yes.
Nevada Fire District,
Yes.
Stinson Beach,
Yes.
City of Larkspur,
Yes.
County Marin,
Yes.
Marinwood,
Yes.
Sleepy Hollow, City of Mill Valley,
Yes.
Inverness,
Yes.
Southern Marin Fire,
Abstain.
all right, passes with one abstention.
Do we have a quorum with the abstention? We're still good. Good. Okay. Fabulous. Let's move on to discussion items. The 25-26 work plan.
Great. So this is kind of the meat and potatoes of today's meeting of the Operations Committee. So what I'd like to do today is run you through an overview of where we are in the process, where we are in the budget development, some updates to the JPA-wide budget, updates and follow-up with some of the JPA-wide proposals that were discussed at the last meeting. And then we'll dive into zone-specific proposals. And we have representatives from many of our member agencies here to help us walk through what this year's proposals include. And then time for discussions and any directions from the Operation Committee here. Next steps would be we will take this input today and update the budget, proposals, etc. as needed. We'll be meeting with the ATC again next week because we wanted to have another meeting following this Operations Committee meeting so that we could discuss incorporating any input we received today. Then on May 1st, this group meets again. So we're going to see you again really soon. And at that meeting, we'll need to take action and determine if we're ready to recommend the work plan and budget to the board for approval. The board meets on May 15th to consider the work plan and budget and approve it. And we do have a deadline, I think of June 1st, to pass the budget and work plan each year. So it's definitely go time. We don't have to make decisions today, but we do want input from this group on how to proceed and finalize things before we meet again. So that's where we are. This is the overall schedule for what we've done so far and what's coming up soon. This includes the last steps that I noted, but I like to keep track of the flow and make sure that we're on track and everybody's aware of what we're doing and what the overall expectation is of getting things done. So we worked through, following the discussion at the March Operations Committee, following meetings with the Advisory Technical Committee and the Ops Ad Hoc Subcommittee of the Operations Committee. That's a mouthful. We went back and took a look at the JPA-wide projects to think through where we could potentially cut some budget from some JPA-wide proposals. So I've got JPA-wide proposals listed on the left. The budget numbers that you've seen previously for fiscal year 25-26, and some updated numbers in the next column. These numbers reflect a decrease in a couple of different proposals. One is the chipper program, because we discussed reducing the chipper program by $100,000, which we thought would not affect services. It does take the kind of buffer for any kind of unknown expenses, but we think we can do that. We had some rollover from this last year, so we think this still accurately reflects where spending will go for fiscal year 25-26. I also took another look at the environmental compliance budget and did some math, processed some invoices, and took a look at the proposals for 25-26, which is what I use to help predict what expenses will be for next year. So taking into account rollover from last year that I anticipate, or rollover from this year that I anticipate being able to carry into next year, and the emergency exemption, et cetera, I reduced the environmental compliance budget by $100,000. And so that's a total savings of $200,000 reflected in that column here. When we talk about the JPA-wide budget, as you know, and for those in the public, it makes an impact on the core budget for each of the zones and therefore each of the member agencies. So that math ends up being a really critical part of the conversation around the budget. Now, when we determine the budget for core projects for each of the zones, we talk about the 80% of core funds that must be spent within each of the zones where those dollars are generated. And that's averaged over 5 years. It's not necessarily every year, but it does need to hold true over 5 years. We're currently on track in terms of that spending. The JPA language talks about this, not in that the purpose of that is to offer the opportunity to think a little bit more big picture across jurisdictions, across zones, so that you could put dollars where the need is, where a lack of funding is, et cetera. So generally, each year, we direct member agencies to budget to 80% of their core budget, and then we determine if there's a good use for that extra or that set aside 20%. It's a way of thinking through potential opportunities to collaborate, to think across jurisdictions. And this year, something came up, which is the wildfire emergency proclamation from the governor's office. So this came out of, was definitely a surprise for staff. Sorry, I bumped a button there. Was a surprise for staff. We didn't see it coming. But this does present an opportunity to do some additional work in the coastal zone that otherwise may be out of reach, or at least out of reach in the near future. So what we've done is proposed $500,000 for work in coastal Marin, funded partially through cuts to JPA-wide proposals, and currently that's looking like $200,000, and partly through that 20% funding set aside, about $300,000. So the remainder of that 20% would then be distributed back to the zones. So this is the budget that you've seen previously overall, and that reflects the 80% budgeting of each core dollar amount for each zone, with a 20% set aside of $1.3 million. This is updated to reflect $500,000 for a coastal project, and then the core dollars, assuming you would just distribute the remainder back to the zones. So these are the dollars that we could go forward with if this group decides to do that. The local and D-space dollars remain the same. These numbers you've seen previously. I want to note that because there are commercial properties and multifamily occupancies in each of the jurisdictions, the exact dollar amounts for each jurisdiction may be slightly off from these numbers, just by a few dollars here and there. So you may see some conflicting numbers and, this or future budgets that are all kind of part of the infrastructure here because there are a few dollars here and there. Pockets of Marin County Fire Department populations in all the different zones, et cetera. So we do our best with the math. So an item, so I have a few different discussion topics to ask you all for your input. The first is this approach that I talked about just now of how to deal with that 20% set aside for core dollars. We discussed it at the ATC, and the ATC generally felt support for working in the coastal zone, given that there's this emergency proclamation and probably a streamlined environmental compliance pathway. Also, there was a recognition that work in the coastal zone benefits all of Marin, and there's quite a bit of fire history in the coastal zone, and a lot of land area and the least amount of revenue. They did ask that the $500,000 be funded either partially or entirely through cuts to the JPA-wide budget. And then we also threw out the idea to the ATC that we could also, or instead, include an ongoing West Marin budget item for vegetation management of, say, $250,000 on an annual basis as another pathway. Generally, the ATC was not particularly supportive of that idea, but it's an option to consider if needed. And I have a floating A down there, but the Operations Ad Hoc Subcommittee also provided input on this. Generally supports work in the coast, funded through a mixture of JPA-wide budget cuts, and also partly through the set-aside. So what I'd like to do now is check in with all of you, given that background, and see what your thoughts are and what your direction is on this topic.
Open it up, Dan.
Maybe you can help me out with some background. Are we treating the governor's executive order as a mandate or an opportunity? I guess I'm a little unclear the way it's being discussed. So maybe you can start with that.
Sure. The emergency proclamation is a streamlining tool, and it's an opportunity, it's optional for entities to do work in coastal Marin in the coast and be exempt from the traditional Coastal Act compliance pathways. It also applies to CEQA, to lake and streetbed alteration agreements, air permits, and things like that. So a number of different regulations that fall under Cal EPA and the California Natural Resources Agency. So the process is that the state releases an environmental protection plan, or EPP, online. And generally that would include a series of best management practices that are then incorporated into your project. You submit your project to the state, GIS files, a project description, and eventually a desktop analysis that actually really reflects what you would do under CEQA anyway. Through this process, you need to get approval from both of those state agencies for use of the proclamation, and then your project is listed online for the public to see. And then you can proceed with your project. So there's still quite a few requirements, but it offers some streamlining benefits, particularly in coastal areas, because coordination with the Coastal Commission can be quite onerous and has been for us and a lot of entities. So it's an opportunity to do work in coastal Marin that we wouldn't normally have because we've been coordinating with the Coastal Commission for several years now.
And if I can add, Secretary Crowfoot basically framed it as a mandate to the regulatory agencies to streamline their processes, and made a call to action for members or for entities like us as an opportunity to take action. So it's a little bit of both. It's a mandate to the regulatory folks, and it's an opportunity for people like us.
So I guess if I could follow up, when we built the shifting mechanisms into the JPA, it was supposed to be that the fire personnel, which would be the chiefs here today and the ATC, would tell us that opportunities were so significant that we should reprioritize. And I don't want the fact that this came down from the state to lose sight of that core belief when we built the agency. I want to be confident that the ATC and the chiefs here all agree that shifting money away from other projects to do more work in the coastal zone is actually the best thing to do in 2025 and 2026. It should, the fact that the opportunities come, I need to hear that it's so great that we need to jump on it and that it's so much more beneficial than all the other good work we're doing. And I haven't heard that in the way this is being framed, so I'd appreciate some comment to that.
Sure. I can start us off and then I'll invite some coastal member agencies to pipe in if you don't mind. We've been working on a lot of different types of projects in coastal Marin for quite a while, brainstorming where to put shaded fuel breaks, roadside vegetation management, kind of defensible space work around critical infrastructure in coastal Marin. We've been looking at pathways modeling. We've invited UC Cooperative Extension's fire ecologist and forester into the discussion and various consultants. We think we have found really important opportunities out there. Some work we've been able to do with the county through their Coastal Act compliance process, and that's been a really great partnership with the county. Some of it needs to be done with the state, and so those are the projects that we have not been able to move forward despite the need and the identified need from our member agencies. Folks online, would you like to discuss?
I can jump in, and one
Yeah, please.
benefit I think that we could see here is if we can accelerate, not compromise our commitment to ecologically sound practices, but accelerate the process, which is, potentially cutting out a lot of the work that we're paying a CEQA contractor to perform because it's a more streamlined process. So if we're investing that $500,000 now, and there's X number of projects that are going through that compliance piece in a more streamlined process, it would be helpful to see what the delta would be, but I bet it would be hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not 100,000+. So it's kind of like using one-time money to offset some potential costs in the future. Now, I don't think it's 100%, right? But I do think that it is, overly complicated in the coastal zone. So that is one benefit there to it. And I don't have an exact dollar, but when I look at the budget, what we were paying that contractor, 500, I think when you had that budget stuff up, 517,000 or 500 some odd thousand, we're down to 217 or whatever it was.
And
That
I'm
was-
not, if I can jump in, Jason, I'm not looking to quantify
Yeah.
necessarily. I just, what's on the table, regardless of which shift gets approved to accomplish this, is something else has to lose out. And the whole mechanism was supposed to be the professionals made a professional recommendation that this opportunity is so significant that those other activities should lose out. And so I'm concerned it's not exactly being framed that way, right? That should always be the way it's framed. This is an amazing opportunity and the need is so great that it'll benefit the other zones enough that these shifts should occur. I don't in any way think, anytime I hear we can streamline stuff, I'm excited,
Totally.
right?
Totally.
But I just want to make sure we can tell everybody it's okay you gave up that something because the benefit was so great.
Well, and I think it's prioritizing and deferring, right? We're not giving something up. It may be this year that something doesn't get accomplished in another zone, but it's more of a deferral
Yeah,
because eventually we'll get.
but this is what I want. I want
Yeah.
you're a professional. I want you and your colleagues to all say, we agree, right? And it sounds like the agency kind of did that, but I just want to make sure that's how it's
Sure.
framed. So,
Anybody online like to chime in?
Yeah, this is Jesse from Stinson. I appreciate Dan's comment. I think I have two things to add. Number one is if you're looking for urgency, I think the recent CAL FIRE hazard maps, both for the SRA and LRA, specifically in our zone, has increased dramatically in the last 2 years. So if we're looking at an urgency for fiscal year 25-26, we can point directly to professionals making recommendations of an increase in hazard in the coast. And then from another standpoint, I feel like sometimes out on the coast, we kind of have our own team meetings, and it's hard being small in voice to be able to rally the ATC or rally all of the other agencies to come out and look at our priorities. So I think in an ideal world, we could all look at what it is, but a lot of the meetings have been happening separately. And I think from an operational structure, we probably need to do better of voicing that at the ATC level. But I just wanted to point it out that sometimes it feels like we're kind of isolated on the other side of the mountain.
Well, what I think Dan is asking for is the remainder of the subject matter experts in the ops committee to voice their opinion.
I am, but I also want to acknowledge Jesse just underscored the big discussion we had when we built the agency was how do we make sure his voice is heard along with Central Marin Fire and San Rafael's voice. And this is I actually think the proposal is necessarily bad. I don't know I have an answer yet to where this money should actually come from, but I just want to make sure we consistently frame it as in 25, 26, this is such a significant opportunity. We need to shift money there. And the professional voice needs to all kind of be uniform about that.
So speaking on behalf of both Southern Rim, but ATC as well, the conversation at the ATC level was that, you know, there were several conversations, and this is one of them is this a priority where other projects that we already have, and this is the 11th hour. So it's difficult for us, you know, in the 11th hour to make these adjustments to projects that we have within the jurisdictions. But there was a discussion about how if these projects happen now and we have the opportunity because the coastal commission is very difficult to get approval, is this going to lower the risk within the jurisdictions if a fire starts obviously coming from the other side? And there was definitely an agreement that was significant. That was like, okay, yes, there is, we all agreed that, you know, fire coming from West Marin into the valley floor could be, you know, catastrophic. So that was discussed. Where the money came from was a difficult decision because, you know, cutting local projects or finding it in JPA, and we were more towards the JPA, try to find some of that funding. And then was brought up about an additional 250,000 a year. And it's like Jesse was saying, in Stinson Beach and in Muir Beach, because of the funding mechanism, they don't have a lot of funding to do these pretty big projects. You know, they just don't. So should we put more funding into an area that there could be a significant impact on fire fuel reduction and defensible space? So that's what it came down to. And the coastal, we still have to go through the process, but the process, my understanding through the Coastal Commission, will be expedited because of this, you know, this document. So yes. And then is there an opportunity? We just found yesterday, or I just got this email yesterday, is $247,000 that's coming back to the agencies from fiscal year 22, 23, and 24 for the D-space abatement funds. We didn't know that was coming back. That's an additional 250,000 about. So that could also, we didn't count that into any projects because we didn't know about it. So there's, you know, possibility of agencies forwarding that to this project.
Thanks. That's really helpful. And I'm just glad the ATC put in the work and said, you know, let this come here. I think this is the way it's supposed to work. And now we're supposed to hash out where this money's going to come from.
Dan, I'll add on to, kind of this topic. And when the ATC members of my organization came to me and validated these projects were needed, I went straight to the business side of where we're going to get this money. What is the best optic of where this money is going to come from? And the next question I actually had is 500,000 enough right now, or do we need to even do more during this opportunity? So, I don't know if we're quite to the funding piece of it yet. And can we continue that discussion? Let's go there.
I think,
So,
think today,
I think the first proposals I think that maybe came out with ATC was coming out of the bucket of remaining core bucket, and that was the 5 zones. In my opinion, if this is something that this group is going to do, it needs to be the entire core piece, which is the $12 million bucket. Now, that's not the 60% because we're keeping the 10% off for the admin to continue to run because we know the organization needs to become. But instead of that 20% for this 500,000 out of the 6 million or 6.5 million, I think we need to also take a cut at the JPA wide core. And Ann presented today, she's already, literally moved 200,000 out of that, which is great. We're trying to get to that $500,000 number. If you look at 12.3 million and you take 500,000 of that, it's about 4% per line item across the board, all the way down. And I think that shows really good commitment of the organization as a whole. So, I think the JPA wide core reduction or, being able to put forth of 200,000 and 300,000 from the remaining core, I think is really, really close. I had 230 and, 262. But I think we also need to then explore in the finance report at the March governing meeting, we have a reserve count of over 3 million sitting there. Is this the time where we really maybe dive into that and get buy-in where we use a portion of those funds and we go for 1 million right now, and then we develop a plan to, rebuild those coffers later on. So
That's actually a great point, because if this is a one-time opportunity, one-time money makes a lot of sense to me. So I'd be open to that conversation.
To your point, I mean, let's use one-time money for one-time funds. And I also think we don't want to be sitting on money. The voters put this money forward for us to put it to work, and that was a clear directive. And so I want to be really careful, with any kind of residual funds that we have, and we obviously need some backup for rainy days, but that's a high enough number that I think probably warrants the use of. And I think, like Dan mentioned, others, I think we all use one-time money for one-time things.
So if you guys want a little extra information on the $3 million restricted reserve fund that we do have a restricted reserve fund policy that targets approximately 15% of our annual budget as our restricted reserve. So that's how we came up with the $3 million. When it comes to eligible items for using the restricted reserve, it was to create a line of credit to manage cash flow and maintain financial flexibility, to engage the organization to sustain operations through delays and payments of committed funding, to pay for one-time non-recurring expenses that will build capacity such as staff development and research and development. So I think, if that's going to be your recommendation, there's the first bullet point of to create an internal line of credit to manage cash flow and maintain financial flexibility fits with what you guys are talking about. Depending on the amount that you guys recommend for this, if we drop below 80% of the restricted fund balance, then we need to put together a plan to refund that within 2 years.
I like the idea of using the reserves, and I feel comfortable that we can find language to make it work. I actually want to make a suggestion for my colleagues too, that we ask the finance committee to revisit the reserve target. A flat 15% made sense. I'm on the finance committee. Made sense when we didn't know what we were doing. Now we kind of know what we are doing. And I think the reserve policy should only be targeting structural costs, ongoing costs. And you're doing blanket across 15%. And a lot of this stuff you don't need to backfill if the world goes to hell. Like you need to be sure you can keep running the agency and pay your bills. Some of these commitments of the 20 mil, they're not ongoing, they're hopefully ongoing, right? But you're not contractually bound to it. And the 3 million is not going to make a dent if you actually had that big a problem. So we should probably nuance the reserve policy. I think 3 million actually sounds kind of high for where we are now that we've matured a bit.
Sure.
So
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, so I agree with everything you're saying, Dan. I just want to maybe caution us that it's a yes, and I think we should be looking at using the reserves, but at the same time, I think it behooves us to have at least a conversation on the JPA wide in total and in the context of it growing year over year. And there are still some line items here that I think we could discuss further to see if we could kind of appreciate Ann and Mark, the work that you've done to already reduce those two line items by 200,000. But I still have a growing concern with the trajectory of this part of our budget year over year. And so while I'm happy to have the conversation around using the reserves, I think we also need to be cognizant of cost containment and the rate at which that the JPA wide is growing versus where each of our individual zones are landing.
Well, and that's actually the bigger conversation for the budget today. That's I've been reflecting on a lot since we've been talking about a couple of the contractual commitments of the agency. We've never had, at least I don't recall, sort of what's going to be the target percentage of the money that goes toward education? What's going to be the target percentage of the money that's going to outreach? And those costs have actually been on a pretty steep upward trajectory, understandably. A lot of enthusiasm, a lot of excitement, but at some point we have to cap how much is being spent on some of those activities because we've got work to do that isn't related to promotion. So I agree with you. It's time, again, we're at that maturity point where we kind of finally understand what we are and what we can accomplish. And we need to now be a lot more thoughtful about how we're managing all the money. So in that context, I agree, before we radically change any one policy, we should look at them holistically. But in terms of moving forward to give the staff comfort, I'm much more enthusiastic of pulling from reserves to get this project moving that this opportunity presents than affecting projects in the 11th hour, as I think the agency correctly framed it.
Yeah, I think these are all excellent points and leading to us. What's screaming here is that we're at a point where we need to spend a day as a workshop to work through. There's questions about the 80-20. We need clarity around those things, the intent. I think that, again, the 80-20 was born from Macaulay because, fear of funding from one area going and shifting to another. The original plan was to not have 5 zones and be looking at this holistically across the county, and that these public conversations wouldn't be occurring. It may be more of a tug of war at the ATC and the other piece. And, I think it's just, we're at a point, we're going to get to the discussions with Fire Safe Marin. We're asking much, much more. And I think there needs to be an awareness level of what that much, much more is, but also what is the right amount. And I think that, we have to consider all of these things as important work, but where do they fall on that scale? Because, we can do all the vegetation management in the world on community-wide field breaks, but if we don't start to see a real impact on each and every home that all of a sudden builds, a community that is safer, the rest of it is for naught. And so I think we need more time in the next, over the course of summer maybe, or into the fall, that we in this group have some of these conversations. We put pen to paper. We talk about, the process and especially with the budget, How do we cost contain? How do we prioritize? What is the scope? Talked a lot about that too. Mission creep, other things that are there. And we're having very purposeful conversations around that. And so I think that, what I'm hearing is general consensus in the room. We should go to our members online about the one-time funds allocated for this coastal piece at $500,000. And then I think we need to transition in the conversation about the rest of the budget as we move forward here and not spend too much time.
That
So maybe
sounds
if we
great.
go to our online members.
Can I also just point out, so this is something we discussed at the last meeting, but I want to point out here as well. The Ember Stomp and CWPP line items, we're looking for outside funding to address these numbers here. So we're hoping that the final cost for those two items would be significantly lower than what is listed in this draft budget. But that's still a question mark. So I wanted to note that. And without those items, then the JPA-wide budget is the same as 24-25.
I'm going to tease you for a moment because if a staff person said that to me, I'd say, well, I'm only going to give you 75. Go find 75. So be careful when you say that sort of stuff if you really want this event to occur. John's like, let's do it. I can see. It's like I'd do that too.
So we're not going to say that. We're going to approach this differently, Dan. Yes. And online,
I'm not seeing any of our ops committee members, but we do have a public comment from one of our ATC members.
let's hold public comment until we continue through the conversation around the budget piece, because I think this is all related and I don't want to open it twice. So moving into the budget piece and working through this, we've got, a need to finalize this in about a week in order to push it up to the board. So
Would you like to move on to the next items to discuss, or?
I think so.
Okay.
I mean, the next items are essentially the budget piece, right?
So we're going to revisit a couple of the JPA-wide proposals that we discussed previously, because we had some questions at the Ops Committee, and some were not quite hashed out yet. We got additional ATC input on the grant program, and so wanted to share that update with you all here. The resident grant program was very, very popular this last year and ran out of funds. We added additional funds to it, helped address quite a lot of need. But there were some improvements that we wanted to make, including because of the high demand, we had to reject a lot of applications due to lack of funds last time around. And so we'd like to kind of change the filtering to make it a little more so that fewer people end up applying for these grants, and therefore fewer people would be rejected. So we wanted to reduce the number of rejections. We wanted to also support Zone 0. So some of the proposal details include adding an income requirement. So say 120% of median adjusted gross income for your household. The Ops Ad Hoc Subcommittee also supported this idea, but also wanted to make sure that we were supporting seniors. We would continue to require that you've had the full inspection to apply. And then this next year, we would restrict improvements to Zone 0, so vents, gutter guards, your fence or gate connection, and also removal of certain vegetation. We'd give priority to first-time applicants, and we'd cap these awards to a smaller number. The original proposal considered by the ATC was 1,000. The Ops Ad Hoc Subcommittee suggested increasing that to 1,500. And then we would allow applicants up to 30 days to apply after inspection. And that really rewards opening up your report, and that's something that we would want to reward. So I'll be looking for your input on these items. And then I also want to note, we looked at how to spread the funding over the 5 zones. And one idea is strictly by revenue, but that does leave West Marin with a fairly small budget number. If we split equally over the 5 zones, that's 20% per zone. And then if you take the average of those two, then that's the midpoint proposal on the right, and that adjusts a little bit for West Marin and addresses that lack of funding, but also gives more weight to the more heavily populated zones. And that is the preferred option by the ATC and also the ad hoc subcommittee. So wanted to get this group's input on these changes to the proposal.
Any thoughts in the room?
Some, some areas aren't getting their inspections until later on. So I think that's, a great starting point to move forward. There could be maybe an opportunity there where we set a deadline towards the end of inspection season, let's call it, and any unused grant funding that's earmarked for a particular area could potentially then go back into areas that might have people that are waiting for a grant fund in the queue, in a sense. And how you decide that, you might then go all the way back to the revenue side. So if San Rafael is putting in 216, but they're only able for 188, say, but they have 216, and West Marin doesn't use all theirs, maybe then the first chunk goes back to San Rafael to make them whole and keep working through the zones. So just some ideas I've been, kicking around with some of these spreadsheets.
Dan?
I appreciate that suggestion a lot. I'd probably just say my caveat is I would do the deadline and then throw it in a county bucket and not get too stressed at that point. But it does concern me that if we so strictly allocate to the zones and we don't have some way to flow it backward, we could just have money sitting there. I'm getting a little nervous because I'm getting rumblings through some of the community leaders I hear from that the cost to home harden is higher than they anticipated when they first enthusiastically said they would do it. And certainly mandates from the state will help because we can just say, look, we're here to help you comply. But as we think through this program, we should be sensitive to that. And I do feel I need to represent the communities I'm from who are going to be a little irritated that with your income restriction. And I'm just throwing that out there because some of the people who get the most mad at being told to spend money are some of the wealthiest people. They're also the people who can influence policy. So, the only other thing I would say is it's actually a lot. If your house has a lot of problems, 30 days is actually not a lot of time to digest a huge bill that you've suddenly been handed. Like some people are going to have to make some significant changes to comply in Zone 0. And I think we might either want to have some sensitivity depending on how high fire your property is or how big your bill is, that maybe have a little more time to apply. Because I just have a feeling you get people with action paralysis. Holy smokes. I just got told I have to spend this much money on my property. Where do I start? Is this required? 30 days could go by like that before and then you're mad you missed some deadline while you're trying to process information.
Not that I'm an opportunist here, but I think that we're just having this conversation this morning with Fire Safe Marin and Fireside, and how we connect the dots with the public and they open the report. And to your point, it's too much to digest. I'm just going to close the report and set it aside. And that public education, the outreach piece, especially around Zone Zero, is going to be very significant because people are going to need like a 3 to 5 year plan because of the cost of some of these action items. There's a lot of low hanging fruit that doesn't require high cost that may be accomplished with $1,500, but it's going to take a whole lot of energy. And we're actually, I don't know if we covered this at all, but meeting with the Marin Community Foundation this week and doing some of this work around the psychology of all of this piece and how do we get the unengaged engaged? How do we get those that feel overwhelmed to start to nibble away at this? And I think that it's all around the communication piece. And we're not having the reach currently with those D-space inspections in each and every household with opening the report and taking effective action on it. And that's where I think we have to put just an enormous amount of effort because the other stuff will not be as fruitful.
Also, I would love to clarify that the 30-day deadline is for pre-approval, but not for getting the work done. We'd probably add another 60 or 90-day deadline to get the work done because of that challenge for finding contractors and any competition of small projects versus larger projects that contractors might be more timely with. And part of the reason for adding that 30-day requirement is also to make sure that the funds continue over the course of the season. And so you're not funding so many proposals at the very beginning of the season and running out of money by the time residents get their proposal or get their inspections later on that year.
I do have an additional question, and I apologize if we've covered this before. So in this line item, we have 900,000, but it states, the grant program and staff to support. What is the breakout? What is the actual grant dollar amount that's going to go back to the residents versus what we're spending for overhead and support?
For subscription of the grant module and time for our grant specialists, we budget 100,000, but it usually comes in between 75 and 85. And then what we have been doing is if we did not meet that 100 for the subscription and the employee, we've been pushing that out for more grants.
Okay. Because where I was going with that the $1,000 cap versus the $1,500 cap. Where are we going to get the most bang for our buck and, allow our community members to be more supportive? What it gives us roughly 800,000. So just things to think about.
Anybody online in the ops committee? Any comments, thoughts?
Not seeing anything, Jason.
I'm seeing general consensus in the room that we're okay with the proposed changes that, the ad hoc committee discussed increasing the cap to 1,500, just, kind of related to some of the cost with these items. And this is a reduction from previous years, so we can spread further. And I think we also discussed at the ad hoc committee that, we're making another adjustment, so let's see how things go, and we can always bring stuff back to this group for recommendations to the board if we want to make further changes.
Well, I would support the ATC's recommendation, but I like Mark's amendment to put a deadline and then the money flows. I would just say flows into a countywide pot so that it gets used. That's the goal.
I'll second that.
Point of clarification.
Yeah, it's not a motion, but we're hearing,
Okay.
looking for consensus. We have a long ways to go here, I think.
Yeah.
We're gonna get hangry.
That sounds great. Thank you, everyone, for your input. The next topic is to revisit the Fire Safe Marin proposal. Last month, we did hear from Fire Safe Marin and a summary of their proposal. There was also a request to go back and revisit the proposal and restructure it and think of it more in terms of our contract with Fire Safe Marin and more of a scope of work. And Mark is going to talk about that.
Yeah, you bet. And Dan, I did want to address a comment you made where you mentioned about costs increasing for public education and outreach each year. Yes, the JPA-wide budget has been increasing, but this is actually the first time that we've asked for an increase in our public outreach budget. Previous years, we've actually had since we started, we've actually had a decrease in the public outreach budget. So this is actually the first time that we've increased, made a request for that. JPA-wide, absolutely, we've been increasing. I do want to find a way to cost contain that.
I was considering more than just this particular contract. I
Okay.
mean, to me, Ember Stop is just you doing promotion and education. It's not a mandate. It's not serving an operational purpose beyond outreach.
Okay.
So to me, all those things should be categorized together.
Gotcha. And one thing, and leaning on another comment that I agree with from Dan is the way we framed the 500,000 going towards West Marin wasn't well framed. And I think as we discussed, the process of creating our public education campaign was not well framed when we brought it to the ops committee last time. So I did want to back up a little bit and give a little context about the relationship between Marin Wildfire staff, and Fire Safe Marin staff. Marin Wildfire has 2 staff meetings a week, Mondays and Wednesdays. Fire Safe Marin participates in our Wednesday staff meeting each Wednesday, and that's to go over our social media and our ongoing public outreach, because Fire Safe Marin is serving as our public information officer in that role. And it also helps us get feedback from or provide feedback to Fire Safe Marin as far as what we're hearing from our member agencies, what they want to hear, or what services they would like to see out of Fire Safe Marin. Then bi-weekly, I meet as executive officer with Jen Gauna and Meg McCabe, so we can start looking at a little bit of higher, more strategic level. And this is when we start really talking about, hey, this is what we're hearing from our member agencies. This is what we need you to start working towards. And then prior to developing the work plan, we have another in-depth meeting. And that's when we start shaping what that work plan would look like. As in a previous example from years past, an ambassador program was not part of Fire Safe Marin's proposal. But in talking with San Rafael Fire and some of the other member agencies, it was clear that the ambassador program was needed so that we could start getting in our outreach to some communities that we have not been successful in doing that. So that's just an example of how the feedback from a member agency is getting pumped back into what we're requesting for Fire Safe Marin. So as I sat down with Fire Safe Marin staff, some of the items that we identified that we needed for them to accomplish for us, and this year is really big on the increased communication around Zone Zero. And every webinar meeting that I've been going to that are statewide, when they're talking about the implementation of Zone Zero across the state, they've been harping on the need for public education to get the buy-in for Zone Zero. So we're absolutely going to need support from our public outreach to get that message out. We're also asking Fire Safe Marin to work with each of our member agencies to create that package that we can all go to our boards and councils with a consistent message, or at least the terminology, the look and feel of everything, so it can be consistent as we go across. So we're asking them for that. One of the guiding principles that we had in our lessons learned was to grow our Firewise communities. And so that's another aspect that we've asked Fire Safe Marin, is to increase the number of Firewise communities, excuse me. And so that's another aspect that we've asked them to increase that. I've mentioned the ambassador program, and the part of the ambassador program is that, you know, take your predecessor's line, and he's, as Chief Tyler used to say a lot, and I think he's still online with us, we're great at preaching to the choir, and we need to find ways to expand that choir, and we are using the ambassador program and other expansions to our outreach to change the choir, to increase that choir. One of the things I've been working with Fire Safe Marin, and I've made the pledge to the ATC at one of our last meetings, is to improve the feedback loop between the member agencies into Fire Safe Marin. So Fire Safe Marin can adequately hear the requests and demands for service from the member agencies, so that we could shape that into a project, shape that into outputs. It's going to require time from your staff to participate in that. So keep that in mind, but it also is good. It does increase time for Fire Safe Marin. Another thing that I've requested from them, it's just because we don't have the staff to maintain this, is our day-to-day, or public outreach, whether it's creating press releases, our maintenance of our social media, and all of our other outreach where it's completely branded as Marin Wildfire. There's no Fire Safe Marin branding on it whatsoever. And that's in order to increase the public's trust in Marin Wildfire and also confidence in Marin Wildfire. And then we're also working with each of our member agencies. What I've asked Fire Safe Marin to increase is materials for your agencies to push out and leave it at the bottom for your branding to be on the bottom. An example that could be, we were talking about potentially having a self-paced evacuation drill to get people to Ember Stomp. And we can create the flyers and the outreach for that. And then at the bottom of it, we would have a space for the law enforcement agency and fire agency for the agency having jurisdiction. And that way it would be consistent all the way across. And then one of the things, and Dan, this is kind of to your point of our residents feeding back into us with some complaints about home hardening. We've been hearing a lot of complaints, not just the cost, but the availability, specifically of fences, of non-wood returns for the fences. It's been a challenge for our residents. So we've asked Marin Wildfire, Fire Safe Marin, to work with Marin Builders Association to increase the number of contractors that are willing and capable and have the materials to do this type of work. And we're also working with the landscape professionals to create consistent methods for them to maintain or create landscapes that adheres to defensible space guidelines and across the strait. And then Fire Safe Marin also it has these where we, and this is part of mission creep. But sometimes we have to seize the opportunity. When the task force meeting came up, quite frankly, Marin Wildfire was going to struggle to provide the staff to get that going, and it was Fire Safe Marin that really came into the fold and helped get us that going. So there are those mid-season borderline mission creep type demands that we make of them, but we felt that that was a very important aspect. And so what we've done is we've asked, based on your guys' feedback, we've asked Fire Safe Marin to kind of give us levels of effort for each of these different things that we've talked about, rather than saying this is how many videos we're going to make, this is how many flyers we're going to push out, or how many social media. We broke it up into more areas of effort. So the ongoing PIO support for our member agencies and for Marin Wildfire, they estimate that's about 30% of their time. To help create a successful Zone Zero campaign, they're looking at 10%. Partnering with our community partners and all of our member agencies, 20% of their effort. Engaging with our community members themselves, which would include Firewise communities, that would be a 10% effort. Helping to increase the workforce both for home hardening and defensible space, they see that as 20% of their effort. And then the media relations that we have with, whether it's KCBS, the Marin IJ, or other media, they see that as 10% of their effort. And so I think that's about as thorough as I can get for you right now, but I hope it gives the context that we've been well engaged with Fire Safe Marin and making requests of them based on what we see as Marin Wildfire staff, but also what we're hearing from our staff members. And that project proposal that you saw was based on what we were asking them to do.
I'll jump in here just for a little bit because I think we have two issues. One is the budget in front of us today. The second is a structural piece that we need to work on as an organization. One of that is the actual contract itself. And it's due up for renewal, or the contract is going to end after this next term. And I think that, we need to fix the contract itself. And Dan and I have met, and I think we've had some offline discussions, but I have failed to get the four of us together as promised prior to this. And clarifying, the scope is delivered by MWPA, and the agency, a contractor, bids on it based on that. And, it's been a little squishier prior to. And we do need to clarify that moving forward. So process wise, I think we have to update the contract itself. And then I think moving forward, certainly for next year, over the next course of the 12 months, this budget year, an RFP needs to be developed in concert with this group that anyone can respond to. So I want to make sure we cover that piece of it.
Yeah,
that's
thank
been
you, Jason.
spoken.
That was in my notes and I missed it. So my recommendation for the creation of an RFP, that we would get this group together to help draft a RFP in November of 25, so that we have 2 months to get it to the board by January of 26. And then Marin Wildfire would work with its member agencies to determine what type of public outreach program that we need, have that built into the RFP. And then that way we can have people respond to that RFP well in time to build it into the budgeting process for the 26-27 work plan.
If I could, I don't, everything you said, Mark, I think as far as what the work involved makes perfect sense. My larger concern with Fire Safe Marin, and kind of parlaying off of what Chief said, is, I mean, this is an organization that existed well before the MWPA, yet it's kind of evolved into an organization that's 99% funded now by MWPA, and seems like it's kind of 100% directed by MWPA goals, which could be fine, but it's kind of shifted from what started as a partner agency into more of a subsidiary ultimately of MWPA. It seems like Fire Safe Marin doesn't really have its autonomy in practice because they're just kind of doing MWPA work or being directed by, which I think is good. And I think a contract this large certainly deserves and needs to, probably required to, go out and look at an RFP, and you're looking at, is it PR agencies for some of the things you're doing versus this other agency. But that would just be my larger concern, is that it's, again, 99% of their funding comes from them, comes from this agency, this group, and it seems like 100% of their work comes from this group, yet they're an independent group. So you're in a lot of areas of gray there, as opposed to where the line is drawn between Fire Safe Marin and MWPA.
Should I go now, Jason?
Absolutely, Dan.
So I'm going to keep using that word maturity. The agency's matured to a point that it needs a real relationship with what's essentially a vendor. I could be a little more nuanced. I think there's quite a bit that Fire Safe Marin is doing that can be sole source to them because of historical reasons. But the contract doesn't provide anyone the ability to figure that out. A lot of the tasks that Mark just described should probably be separated out and considered whether they should be bid, or whether we ought to bring some of that in-house. Like your current contractual relationship with this organization provides no ability for the organization to judge if it'd be cheaper to hire somebody to do it, right? You see a need, you go to them, they jump on it. That's awesome. And that's how we all solve problems in the short term. But then for budgetary purposes, we need to take a step back and say, how many dollars are we sending out that we could keep if we had a person capable of doing this work? So that's where you are. You're just at that level of maturity, and the agreement. Bill Tyler's gone, so I could throw him under the bus. Like when we started with this whole thing, right? He's here. Good, Bill. You can chime in. But I remember Bill pulling me aside. He said, we aren't going to be able to do this at the beginning without Fire Safe Marin. And he was absolutely right. But also, he kept telling me, don't worry about it. They're great people. We'll sort it out. And of course, that's not who I am. I need contracts and details. And I see now that piece didn't happen correctly. So it's time to have it happen correctly. It's doable. I think we all support what's going on. And I think actually the relationship will be better. I think the most alarming thing I heard in the last presentation was that because we don't really have a system, if any chief in the county is asking Fire Safe Marin to do something, they're doing it, and Marin Wildfire is paying for it. That's not management. That's not oversight. And it doesn't mean it's not right and shouldn't get done, but it's not being controlled as a vendor contract. And that's what we have to change here. And just generally, since I'm on my high horse for a moment, And I had this thought driving in, again, with that maturity. I don't know what's in place in this organization to review contracts and agreements. And, we're buying a lot of shiny toys. And I know in the city attorney world right now, they're pushing back on vendor contracts on shiny toys because most of them say the vendor gets to control all your data forever and ever. Amen. And that's a problem. So, I don't know if we have somebody who is scrutinizing that. I don't know if we have a risk management service to make sure that we're pushing risk where it needs to go. And maybe as part of maturity, it's double checking that we have those resources available to Mark and his staff, because I would hate to know there's a vulnerability, but I can't help but look at this agreement and go, there's a vulnerability of some kind here. Because somebody should have said, wait a minute, this isn't really, this is a partnership between people who all have the same vision. And now it needs to be a contract.
I can't give you an easy answer on the, all of our professional services agreement when it comes to data. The data is ours. We've had legal counsel on both for intellectual property and or contract attorneys. And then now becoming a member of the Special District Risk Management Association, they have taken a view, a look at our professional services agreements and only made one recommendation for it.
Great. It's good to hear.
Others in the room before we go to our ops folks online?
Just a couple comments, Mark. I appreciate, I think, the work that's going into this, and Dan, I agree with. Everything that you're talking about. I've had similar thoughts where, we're looking at how much are we spending on these functions, and in my mind, I'm like, well, they should just have someone on staff of fire safe at Marin Wildfire to be the PIO to help run with the social media, like most of our agencies do. But I appreciate, the conversations about doing an RFP and kind of identifying what makes sense of like the overall scope and the broader conversation. But the one piece for me, because this is, I think, the most immediate thing in front of us, is the budget for the upcoming year. And while I understand that we have these kind of rough percentages of a budget, what I still haven't been able to glean is if we're increasing the budget by 30% or $300,000, and we're having conversations about dipping into our reserves to help support West Marin, I still have a level of ambiguity or like a lack of clarity on, well, what is that $300,000 getting? And while I understand that we have, these percentages, why couldn't we continue those percentages with the existing dollar amount that was budgeted last year? And so what I'm still not hearing is the explanation over the delta. At the last ops meeting, we heard that, they're looking to double their staff. And I think that's also, an important data point as we're discussing this. But as I look around, I don't think any of our agencies are bringing on, staff, just given where we are in the economy and what, like Dan and I were talking about at the beginning of the meeting before it started, is like, how's our budget forecast looking like for the next couple of years? So for me, because this is something that, we'll be voting on, and I know that, our board will be voting on, I don't have a level of comfort voting on something like this when I still haven't gotten a strong justification for a 30% increase.
Well, that's fair. And so if we were to keep the fire safe Marin budget flat, we are not going to be able to see the increase in the Zone Zero outreach. We are going to be have to decrease the amount of time that we are working with our FireWise communities. And then I really think the time and effort that we are putting towards the workforce development with Marin Builders Association is going to be jeopardized. And then it's great when the member agencies are saying they want feedback, they want input. Fire Safe Marin has actually asked for that many, many times, and some agencies have said have come on board and said, all right, let's do it. Other agencies have not. But so if we do embark upon that, we do need the member agencies to actually step up and do it. But also that does incur time. So those were the four areas that if we keep them flat, that's where we're not going to see an increase in work.
So I appreciate that. I guess I question this notion of it's all or nothing, right? So it's you either provide us $300,000 or we're not going to do zone zero. I think the question I
I think
have
it's,
is,
we wouldn't be able to put as much effort towards
So-
zone zero.
but is it, the larger question is around just like the prioritization, right? So if we want, we all know that zone zero is a big, issue for us in this upcoming year, then what are we currently doing that we could deprioritize under the existing funding constraints? Like, I just don't see it as this, binary decision where we have to increase the budget because we have all these things, but then we're not having a related conversation of the prioritization of everything else that's on the work plan and how we assign resources to that.
I think what John's getting at, if I can jump in, and I think, Mark, your answers are underscoring it, is I'm just going to keep saying maturity all day. In our infancy as an organization, all these budget line items are not operational line items. They're actually like who we're giving the money to. And I think part of the challenge that John's articulating is we should be saying we need to expand this operational cost because there's a need. And then you could then say, and my recommendation is I'm going to spend that money on this vendor, right? But instead, the black box is the vendor, and then we have to find out what the vendor's doing. And it's time to change the way we show all this to people, and we have to actually break it out to, these are the tasks that the board and the staff have identified are what this organization's going to do. And then these are the vendors and what they cost to support us in those missions. And I think that would help a long way, because then John doesn't have to get stressed about whether hiring people or not. The question is, should we expand this budget by 300,000 because this operational need is there, right? I mean, I always try to emphasize with people, I don't really want to know how a vendor's getting the job done if they're getting the job done. But we're now asking that question, right? And
And that's, yeah, I mean, that's the challenge, right? Is we're transitioning in this maturity
Yeah.
piece here, and we have collectively, certainly as the fire service, and our chiefs meeting the other day, we were asking, let's task Fire Safe Marin with this. They're getting hit, and we need clarity on who they work for, which is clearly MWPA. And I think as we move forward, and with this next year, work needs to flow through MWPA to Fire Safe Marin. That needs to be clear, because they're reacting and responding to what the need and the demand is. And some positions had to be transitioned from part-time to full-time. And I think with any of us, we know where our budget hits hardest, and that's the personnel piece. The work they're doing is predominantly outreach. Certainly they have contractors for web stuff and videos and those things, but we're asking them to be out there more for all of us consistently, considerably more. I'd say more than 30%. So the transition of some of those FTEs from half-time to full-time, it increases. I mean, Fireside, their increase is over 30%. It looks like also.
The increase for Fireside is because we moved some of the metrics budgeting from metrics into the Fireside because it was directly related to D-Space. So actually, if you look at those
Doesn't
two
look
line
like
items
that.
together, it's actually a net loss.
Look at that. That doesn't prove my point really well.
Sorry, Jason.
But I think related to the Fire Safe Marin piece, I mean, we're here towards the tail end. I get what you're saying, and where's that comfort level, and I think they did present. If these are the items we're being asked to do, these are where the increases are based on that. If you take the 30%, this is what the impacts are, and Mark covered them through each one, and they're substantial. And I think that this conversation highlights the need for the bigger issue, which is, to Dan's point, what pieces come in-house, what don't. We have that conversation. We develop an RFP. There's a response to the RFP. My fear is you get any communications firm involved. It's going to be considerably more expensive, but we haven't tested that market, right? You and I don't know that until it's tested. What I do think is Fire Safe Marin is responding to what we've asked of them. If we want to to have this level of service from them. You know, and start taking away other things. I mean, there's a reason we have the most Firewise communities anywhere in the state. Because they're engaged. There's somebody doing that. I know my agency doesn't have capacity to add, you know, PIO functions. And it was asked of us, doesn't your PIO serve as MWPAs? And I said, absolutely not.
I tried.
You know, they're already stretched too thin. But that also tells me that we're covering some of those things because they haven't been done. And so there's a workload that corresponds to this budget request. And I think what we're all saying is we need clarity in the mechanisms of the contract. We need to look at the relationship differently than we have historically. And we're going to get that opportunity over this budget year to do that and have, you know, multiple vendors respond and test the market. And I think we'll all have that level of comfort, you know, that certainly sitting here today, you're probably not going to have because we're not in, you know, 30 days going to develop an RFP, test the market. You know, we're really responding to a contractor is responding to an increased demand that we've placed on them.
Only challenge I see though is Fire Safe Marin's gonna need, got a ghost here. So they're gonna need, sounds like part of this increase is to hire people, right? I would not want to be in the limbo of hiring somebody if my contract could be totally different in a year. So I guess I would say I could get behind, I have a level of trust here that I'm going to extend. I could get behind approving this budget number, but I would caution Fire Safe Marin not to hire anybody till we sort out what their contract actually says, because it may be that portions of what they're proposing to do go subject to an RP and get awarded somewhere else. And I'm not an opponent of sole sourcing, but we have to have that conversation, right? We have to document why that makes sense, and we haven't done that work either. So it's just, it's conforming practice to norm now, right? We're at that point. We have to do that.
And to John and Dan's point, as we craft that RFP, that could be the process that where we decide, are we better off having some internal employees versus including that as part of the RFP?
So we have a document though that explains what we get for the 1.2, because right, this has an asterisk on it basically then, right?
Yes.
Here's what we're getting for 1.2. We're going to put these processes in place and immediately engage. Okay. And that's.
Yeah, I think another thing, as we think about the future and how we start to educate people about how we manage money, taxpayers' money here, is to start to try, to the extent that metrics can achieve this, is some level of ROI, right? So if you're going to add $300,000 to the budget because you're going to take on some new activity, being able to articulate that every dollar spent on this activity is saving us $3 over here is another way for us to have comfort recommending budget increases. So, and I have a feeling that's part of this story, is that spending dollars with Fire Safe Marin is probably a high return on investment, but we don't have that quantified to articulate it to anybody.
I think that's part of any contract and an expectation.
Well, and the expectation, right? Like a scope of work that helps us tell the story. Because right now it's mostly we all like Fire Safe Marin. That's what this whole agreement's kind of built around, and that they're performing, and nobody disagrees with that. But you know, several of us, if not all of us, have sat in front of certain taxpayer groups, try to explain what we do and why it's justified. And I want to be able to do that when this organization is getting that scrutiny again.
Agree. Is there anybody online from the ops group before we go to public well, we're not ready there yet. We still have some other, oh boy. Anybody from the ops group online? Okay. I think we have some clear direction for the future. Certainly, I think a level of comfort. Let's move on to the next piece and then.
Great. Okay, thank you all for your input there. So each year in this month of April, we spend some time talking about zone-specific projects and proposals. And we won't dwell on all of them because many of them are repeats of previous years. Some are maintenance of previously proposed and approved vegetation management programs, projects. Some are, repeats of programs that we've already discussed, et cetera. So mostly we'll highlight the ones that are new and I'd like to make sure that you're aware of. What I've done is I've invited reps from each of the zones to attend and help explain projects that are proposed within their zones. So I see Sarah here. Do you want to jump in and start us off with Novato? What I'm going to do is share my screen, unless you have slides, which I don't anticipate. Okay. Share my screen here and just show this spreadsheet. This is also attached as a PDF to the agenda online. So you can follow along. Anybody at home can follow along as well. We've split it by zone. This is the same format we've used previously. Central Marin we'll get to, but there are no new projects here, so I don't think we need to go into great detail. I'm gonna just scroll down. Sorry for the dizzy. Scroll down here to Novato and let Sarah go ahead and discuss her proposals. Yeah.
Well, thank you for having me and letting me represent our proposals. I wanted to give a little bit of evaluation from where we are this fiscal year and how we're making up those budgetary decisions for next fiscal year. I've broken up our proposals into the vegetation management projects, our education projects, and then our staffing and our grant program. For our vegetation management projects, we have 9 smaller fuel breaks and evacuation route clearance projects. Most of those budgets will remain the same. We are increasing them slightly just to increased costs with mowing on our contractors. All of those continue to go up. This fiscal year, we've spent approximately $292,000 on our smaller fuel breaks and have treated 100 acres, which is a $2,900 cost per acre, $2,900 cost per acre. We also have our Greater Novato Shaded Fuel Break, which is huge. We have spent about $1.2 million on that this fiscal year, treating about 250 acres with a $4,800 cost per acre. That project, we are increasing to have 100,000 designated for this next fiscal year, potentially amending our project-specific analysis through the California Vegetation Treatment Programs, programmatic EIR. There are pockets that were missed during our original mapping efforts, so we have to kind of go back and really follow the houses and catch all of that broom and other dead and down debris. Our education piece, we have a multimedia campaign project and the 2 demonstration gardens. Those budgets will not change this next fiscal year. This fiscal year, we did a creative refresh to our Zone 0 marketing and targeting vegetation projects. Previously, we were really targeting our wildfire mitigation specialists and trying to get the residents of Novato to apply and sign up for our home assessments. We've also done an in-store ad placements at the Safeways in Novato. The demonstration gardens, this year we've spent the funding on specific plant signage and interpretive signs for the demonstration gardens. We didn't add any new demo gardens or any new big projects. It was just the signage. We also don't propose any additional funding for that budget. It will stay the same. For staffing, we have this year we had 4.5 wildfire mitigation specialists, 1 part-time wildfire mitigation specialist supervisor. one vegetation program manager and one vegetation management specialist, and our fire mitigation ranger. Next fiscal year, or this fiscal year, we've been budgeted for 3 vegetation management positions, so we're finally hiring that person hopefully soon, and we're going into the interviews next week. And then, so we have 3 full, in our core projects, 3 full vegetation management special positions. Our grant program is one of our local, those are all of our local projects are for our grant program. Novato Fire Grant Program has awarded $854,860, and the residents have invested $3.3 million. Our grant program will probably end in May, which is a little earlier than normal. Usually we can make it to mid-June, but we had a lot of residents sign up for grants. And we have those 4 grant programs, and they will all continue into the next fiscal year. We do have one new project this year for our D-Space, one of our D-Space projects. We're adding an equipment project to kind of capitalize on purchasing 2 new electronic signboards, specifically to be used on our vegetation management projects and potential burn days, which we're having today. So that's part of that budget, and then potentially a 360 camera or some sort of piece of equipment to be able to capture all of those long linear fuel breaks or evacuation route clearance, and to be able to give that professional quality photos for our outreach material. And that's all of our new proposals.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah.
We've also got Southern Marin in the room. Marshall, would you like to address proposals for Southern Marin? Yep. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Let me find Southern Marin real quick here. Pardon me if I clear my throat. So Southern Marin, and it kind of goes alongside the City of Mill Valley as well. But a lot of our focuses this year have been on consolidating our past projects for better tracking and metrics on what we want to do. So there's not a lot of new projects, but they may flag as new due to new project codes or new project names, but they're more of a consolidation of past projects. Some of these focus efforts, well, before I get into that the one big new one that carries across both is our a staffing position for administrative aid. It's a shared position between City of Mill Valley, Southern Marin Fire District, and the Southern Marin Fire District's general fund as well. So it's a collaborative one split appropriately between all 3 entities, and the dollar amount reflects appropriately there. Outside of that, all the staffing that's there is consistently reflected in the current budget and will be continuing forward with any sort of increases necessary to keep those staffing positions fulfilled. As far as projects go, for the City of Mill Valley, there were 4 large fuel breaks that were around the City of Mill Valley. We've consolidated those into one. This current fiscal year, we really focused on allocating our core funds to do the environmental compliance review, which poised us perfectly to be able to take advantage of this opportune moment with the executive order. So that's our focus next year, is that $350,000 allocated towards the Mill Valley Great Shade Fuel Break that will hopefully combine or work to combine all of those 4 fuel breaks around the city's perimeter, better showcasing what we're trying to do around the city. And historically, with our core funding allocated to Mill Valley, this year is kind of that opportunity to push more of the Southern Zone's core funds towards the City of Mill Valley instead of other areas around the zone. Southern Marin Fire, we worked really diligently on our Ring Mountain Fuel Break in the current fiscal year. Most all of our projects will still reflect as ongoing with ongoing maintenance. The one change there was we did combine the Tam Valley and Homestead Valley fuel breaks into one. So again, that will reflect as a new project, but it's really just a consolidation. We reduced from about 33 down to 22 projects per line item to better be able to track what we're doing there. For the most part, everything's ongoing or established. One big element that you'll see that's new within the project's descriptions is our community fuels reduction program. This is basically anything outside of or inside of our perimeter fuel breaks, everything from direct assistance to evacuation route clearing to chipper programs, all gets married into this community fuels management project so that we don't have constraints with moving funds between individual project items. We can focus on what the community needs based on an on-demand basis. That's reflected in both City of Mill Valley and the Southern Marin Fire District. Other than that, I believe that concludes our last project that has a new name to it, but again is a consolidation of past projects, is our emergency notification education program or project. That is again a consolidation of everything related to reach out to a community for educational purposes around evacuation, as well as maintaining and enhancing our outdoor sirens, our red flag warning signs, anything related to evacuation, again, consolidated into those projects and mirrored on both sides of Southern Marin Fire and the City of Mill Valley. For that, I think it concludes all of our projects on our list.
That's great. Thank you so much. We also have online Quinn Gardner. Quinn, are you able to report out for San Rafael?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Good morning/afternoon. I think we're almost there, everybody. I'll be fairly brief. A lot of these are continuations like other folks have met. Within the core, there are a couple new projects or highlights. One of which is you'll see the San Rafael San Anselmo graded shaded fuel reduction zone, sassafras. The budget there is going down a lot. We think will be a decent amount of rollover. Work has started this year, but we will anticipate using some of that money. So as well as support from county parks and Measure A on some of that work. So we're lowering that budget to balance everything out. And then we've also got, I think Ann, Kate just emailed you about it, but we do have a project that's not on this list, but is in the portal. That is the Southern Heights Ridge project, kind of the area between Bret Harte or off of Bret Harte Road. So that'll be a new project this year, as well as hopefully getting the groundwork done in the Deer Valley and treating all of San Rafael Lincoln Hill. So for a lot of our vegetation work, we've really looked at our borders, right? North San Rafael, South San Rafael, et cetera, as well as areas where we have a fire history to make sure that we're focused on reducing work there. And then, of course, we have things like staff, our ranger program. We are splitting between core and local this year so that we can do a little bit more zone-wide work, not just work within the city of San Rafael proper. So we're excited about that transition as well. I'm happy to take any questions, but that's the gist of it all.
Thanks so much, Quinn. We also have Marin Wood here to, and I'm wondering, Eric, do you want to talk about your projects? Oh, and I'm sorry, I did, this spreadsheet is missing one proposal that we can also share and dig into in more depth that I will pull up. Go ahead, Eric, if you want to address that.
Yeah, thanks. And again, I know our project it sounds like was discussed at the ad hoc group, and I certainly wanted to attend that. Unfortunately, the one day that it was the one day I couldn't do. So apologies for not being there to have that conversation. The one project we put in was to do some very much needed rehab work on Queenstone Fire Road. It's an extremely active fire road. It's actually played a key role as an access point for 2 different open space fires in the past year. And then my understanding was, and again, I wasn't in the room, but when this was discussed at the ad hoc, that it was not a fundable project. So I am kind of looking for some feedback on what that discussion was and then the opportunity to weigh in on it a little bit.
I can jump in from the ad hoc committee. I think, we discussed it does play an important role from a fire protection standpoint and others, but I think that the group felt it was a slippery slope, no pun intended, if we got into funding projects that often, or at least historically across the county, could end and result in litigation from, work that's done. And there's a slide post that. And I think that was probably one of the biggest factors. And then does it open up a can of worms related to fire roads across the entire county that are extremely expensive to update and maintain, many of which are on, county open space, National Park Service lands, other city open space districts. So I think collectively, and I don't want to speak for the group, but I want to summarize the conversation was that if we head down a path and we start doing fire road repair work that, potentially ends in some level of litigation, that can be very problematic for an agency like this. And then the second piece was, does this open Pandora's box to across the county with fire road pieces that, you know, are really the responsibility of the landowner? So those were the kind of two components. I'll look to our ad hoc group that was there.
Yeah, I think when we, you know, especially being on the ad hoc committee a few times now, you know, I think we always rely on the experts and try to find a way to say yes, especially when there's been that expert analysis and something that I look at specifically. And when this came up first, I was the letter of the law. Is this a project that would meet the criteria for funding? And I think you could argue it both ways at first glance. And so let's just say it's justified, because I look at this as a policy precedent setting potential project. And so you move to the next step. Hey, could it be supported by local funds? Yes, but your local funds are lower. It doesn't cover that project. So then it comes to the core discussion, and it's the strength of our JPA. Does it meet it? I think there's an argument. It's multi-jurisdictional, right? You said it's key access to multiple locations, and you could say yes. It's a core discussion. Should we cover it? So where I go back to our, you know, our core values, our goals and objectives, and I'm looking at, you know, being in all these meetings the past few years. This is a precedent-setting kind of decision for me. So I think it's good for this group, and I may be wrong. And if I'm wrong, I'm not going to jump on the table for it. I think we need to be clear. I don't know that CIP, capital improvement projects for fire roads, was ever our intention to cover, right? It was, when you go to our core values and objectives, there's 5 goals. It's vegetation management, it's detection, alert, evacuation, grants, public outreach, education, defensible space, and home hardening. And when you go down to those objectives, there's objective 1.4, it's maintain appropriate fire roads, vegetation management. And then it has a note that fire roads are not evacuation routes. And so I'm looking back at, you know, how are we supposed to use our funds? It should be really primarily focused. And for the fire roads, even too, it's vegetation management. It's not capital improvement types of projects. So my first decision point was, it's worthy of a discussion. Do I think, from my one vote, does it meet the criteria of what our intent was and our goals and objectives? And I didn't think it did. And then I said, okay, is there a way to say yes in this circumstance? Because there's a little gray. To get to yes. And is there any decision points where we could find a way to say yes? The dollar amount isn't high. It helps one of our member agencies. It is supported, I think, generally by the chiefs that are impacted in this region. Can we make a decision without setting precedent? So that's where I got to. And then when I started, again, this is a high level conversation, and I'm glad you're here to, you know, go through it, was, hey, does this solve a long-term problem? Like, it's a low dollar amount. If we do this, you know, you got grading, you always have issues that when you touch roadways, hillsides. Does this solve a long-term problem, or is it a quick fix? And it appeared to be potentially a quick fix where we could have problems down the road. And so it just didn't get to the point where I could support it with that, our high level conversation. And then again, I go back to the second piece. You know, our wording of criteria for projects to be approved, we left it pretty open-ended to have discussions like this. And if we get into, we're going to start moving core funds to improve fire access roads that are very important with these monies, I think it's going to have a major impact on us. So I think it's a good discussion. And maybe we have, but in our discussion, I don't remember any other cases where we did a major improvement to a fire road. So it's a good discussion for the group. That's kind of where I was coming at it in the discussion pieces, but happy to answer any questions and continue it.
If I could just respond to a couple of things that, you know, I think kind of in terms of the long term or the quick fix, I'm not exactly sure how that's defined. And I would say all of the vegetation management work we do is also a quick fix. It's not long term. It's got to be constantly kind of maintained. And then in terms of this benefiting one agency, I think it actually benefits a lot of agencies, because I think a lot of the agencies that are part of this group use this road. And there's only a portion of it that's actually on Marinwood property. A lot of it stretches into county property, then it connects to other roads that stretch into Novato property, and so on and so forth. I certainly agree that there's never really been a discussion around this, which is also why I'm bringing this to the table. I think it is something that deserves some level of clarity in terms of precedent. There was a, $200,000 approved to do an assessment and study of all of the county fire roads, and I think you kind of swung the door open with that to some degree too. I recognize that's a study and that's a look, but what's the point of this agency doing that work if this agency isn't then going to say, well, the fire roads need some work, and should we go into that? I think there's liability with everything, and as somebody who manages the district, I live that world, as I'm sure everybody else here does, and you're always trying to reduce, but right now that road is simply not passable. The work has already been put in to come up with a design that addresses both grading and drainage, because let's face it, it's the drainage that causes the problems, not the grading itself. So a lot of the upfront legwork has been done. And I guess I would just look towards, I don't know that legal has weighed in on the eligibility of MWPA funds towards this kind of project. I'd be curious as to an actual legal opinion on it. But I do think that, as you do kind of some of this other work, and one of the things Chief Weber said earlier that stuck with me is, if you're not building a community that is more resilient, everything else is for naught. And this particular access road has proven to prevent existing events from going down to those areas that are treated and reaching residential areas. And it proved to be the very first line of attack that stopped, small fires from becoming much larger problems. Of course, the planes and helicopters that came in shortly thereafter were the much bigger factor, but this allowed people to get there first, know where to be, lay the hose, get things happening. So I would look and I would push for further, and I don't think today is the day, but exploration, discussion of this type of work, a formal policy statement that kind of goes up to a board level on this, rather than kind of what seems to be a gray area and somewhat arbitrary. I certainly agree and understand all the points. I'm going to respect and abide by them, obviously, but I do think that this is something that should be defined, and if it is applicable, then what are the procedures, the process, the requirements for qualification of having this type of work done? Again, I see these as incredibly vital pieces in the fire protection and the fire prevention landscape. And we've certainly done veg management along the road, but that's pointless if you can't utilize the road. So that's a little bit of where I'm at. I'd be looking for further discussion on it as this progresses, because I do think it's going to come up. I do think that, again, the fire roads, especially some more than others, are just critical pieces in actually protecting communities and making them a more resilient community when it comes to fire protection and prevention. So that's where my 2 cents is. I kind of went into this thinking, boy, this just seems like a slam dunk. I certainly also went into it knowing that there would be some pushback on this, that there would be some questions raised, some trepidation towards doing this kind of work. But I don't think that trepidation or those questions should prevent this from actually being explored as things that should or could be done.
I think just to clarify one thing, I do think obviously fire access roads are multi-jurisdictional. It benefits a majority, and that's why in my decision making, I believe that it went to the core discussion. So I agree with you there. What I'll just say is that I think having access to fire roads, I mean, there's a gray area. This is a policy decision, number one. And I don't think the intent in all the meetings that I've been since the inception of this JPA, the intent, and it is for the board to ultimately decide. I agree. It's not some subcommittee. But our discussion was, it's to have access to fire roads, not to do capital improvement projects on our fire roads. We would have no budget within this JPA if we did that. And can you imagine? Our chiefs are very creative. I would imagine that we would have a handful of these every year that would have a major impact. It's the wrong bucket of money that I would argue, but it's not for me to decide. It's just when I go back to guiding documents that guide me through this, everything is not related to improving fire roads. It's to clear vegetation, to have access to fire roads. And that's where I land. And then again, I even take it to another level because this discussion's perfect, right? Every situation's different. Is there a way not to set precedent? Because I would hate to set the precedent that we're going to do fire, road, capital improvement projects. But sometimes there's specific circumstances where you want to consider it and think about it. Is there a way to do that and have a decision-making matrix to get there without setting that precedent? And that was our discussion. I'll stop there, but I understand where you're coming from. And it is a good discussion because it's.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to solve this today. I'll use Larkspur for a second. In Larkspur, we have fire roads that just for vehicle access, really, that's all they're used for. We have fire roads that the community thinks are actually passive trails and don't even realize are fire roads. And then, we have fire roads that are critical evacuation routes. And I think each one of the ones I'm describing has a different level of hitting the targets in the gray area. So I don't know who to refer this back to, but I think some work needs to be done on maybe what components of work on a fire road qualify for this money. And then maybe we cap a percentage of the budget that this agency contributes to for fire roads once we've set that. So at least an agency could know, okay, if I can come up with a certain amount of local fund, I'm going to have an opportunity to go get this other pot of money. Because it is gray. I mean, it really is gray. I'm out of my depth really on the, it's hard for me because I know I can think of 2 fire roads that I'd have to tell the community are actually fire roads. They don't even realize it.
Yeah, we had early discussions in the MWPA piece about capital improvements, specifically roadways, maybe less of fire roads. And the concern was that it would eat up so much of the budget because they are so expensive, the capital improvement projects. But Eric, I don't want to leave you hanging. It sounds like we need to elevate some stuff. And I think it goes back to Dan's statements about maturity in the organization. It's time to start putting pen to paper so we, at least in 3 years, 5 years, people aren't having these same conversations. But I would offer, if we haven't already engaged with you at County Fire, that we look to see how we can assist with the fire road, because it is a critical fire road. And with our wildland fire mission, we want to make sure we maintain it. So, well, let's chat offline to see if we can get it done, because I think it is important that it be done. I'm just not sure, as you're hearing today, this is the right mechanism for that. But we want to maintain that fire road, so I'll work with you offline on it.
I appreciate that, and I do appreciate the discussion, and again, I think we've had a lot of full circle conversations that are very similar in nature here today. Of if not something like this, why not, and what makes something like this yes, to Todd's point, or a no, and just having that level of clarity. And I recognize that our agency is a small, very limited resource agency, is looking at this through a different set of eyes and a lens too. And even, just with the local funding that comes in is small, but I don't know that utilizing local funding solves your liability problem or issue here either, because my understanding is even projects that are locally funded still fall back on a liability issue for this agency as well. So it's a lot of things to answer. I do appreciate everybody's feedback. I'm not here to rock a boat on this. I do think it's an important project, and I do think it deserves to get sorted out sooner than later.
Jason, if I can add a couple things. Eric mentioned the project for evaluated fire roads. It's been completed in Novato. It has not been completed throughout the rest of the county. It was a project that's in this current fiscal year that we're just getting around to getting started. And so this could give us an evaluation and an inventory for us to start making any decisions on down the road. And we'll be able to make decisions from a more informed position, number one. Number two, this is not something that we have had our legal counsel evaluate just yet. So I definitely can put that in the queue for legal opinion on this. And then to your guys' point, I think it's a policy discussion that we will need between Marin Wildfire staff and Ops Committee. We will need to do our due diligence to provide all the information that we push up to the board for a policy type decision.
I do think a legal opinion might be an unnecessary expense. So I think this is really, I'd like to have it go to wherever, ad hoc committee, ATC, somewhere to hash out what the hell is a fire road, and then how does a fire road fit into the mission of the organization? And I don't think we need to pay council to figure
Okay,
that
and
out.
so I think our first step is that current project that we have on, and as part of that project, it's going to create an inventory and also can help start creating those definitions you're talking about.
Yeah, and I would limit, legal just to weigh in on the question of eligibility. Within the scope of the language of Measure C, is this type of a project actually, because that might end all other conversation right there. And that would actually save, I think, a lot of work in the long run. And then in regards to the fire, I actually wanted to put this on last year, but didn't because I knew that fire road kind of status inventory was coming along and kind of held off, but now the road's at a point where, like I said, it's not passable. And I certainly appreciate Chief Weber and everybody else, and have certainly had levels of conversation, but a lot of it has to do with the use of this road and a lot of heavy equipment that's gone up and down there, along with a couple heavy winters in a row, and here we are.
I have a parking lot item, although my new facilitator tells me we should say bicycle rack, not parking lot, to be green. For future discussion, I know that's another agenda item, but Eric said something I really would like to have a future agenda item about, which is that this agency has liability for things it funds, that it passes the money to local agencies. That shouldn't be. So if that's been opined by anybody, I'd really like to understand why. And that should be a future discussion.
We'll be busy after this budget approval. These are good things. I mean, this is the agency's just about old enough that we've ground tested some of these things and we need to fix them. Or clarify. Okay, moving on. Do we hit the west? Do we hit?
We have a couple of things left to talk about. I know it's 1:04, but we do have a couple of items left. No slides for these, but we have some proposals in West Marin. I want to invite West Marin folks to discuss if you'd like. Probably will be very, very brief because there aren't a lot of new projects that we haven't heard about already in West Marin. Wondering if Stinson Beach would like to go, since I know you're right there, Chief.
Yeah, you're not going to give me the project, so I have to come up with them off the top of my head.
I'll share the screen.
No,
Just be better,
You didn't
very
memorize
quick at
everything?
1:04.
a lot of recurring projects out in Stinson. We're continuing existing projects, and we're going to be highlighting some evacuation alerting to get residents and visitors safe, prioritizing life first, then property and environment. That's it.
Great, thank you. Inverness, is there anything you'd like to say about your work here?
Pretty self-explanatory. Just going to do some D-space inspections and continuing some evacuation route work along some of our roads here.
Great, thank you, David. How about Bolinas? Isaac?
Yeah, we'll be continuing our D-space inspections, and we do have one new core proposal for a vegetation management project similar in scope to one that we did this year that was funded by a PG&E grant with some assistance on environmental from MWPA. We'd like to do a similar thing in the downtown area up to the Little Mesa that would help protect an evacuation route on the Little Mesa and some critical infrastructure in the downtown, mainly a hillside vegetation work. We would like to supplement the core proposal with some rolled over local funds that we've accumulated. That's pretty much it.
Great, thank you. And that's the Wharf Altura Hillside Fuel Reduction Project?
Correct.
Great, thanks very much. Last, I know Gavin and Jordan weren't able to join, so I'll just note that there is a project called the Blueberry Ridge Fuel Reduction Project, and that includes work along sections of Fire Road and Woodacre. And I know. I'm sure there will be blueberry pies and all sorts of things involved. 25 acres on the north and south side of the ridgeline, anticipating treating in the last half of 2025 if possible. So that's it for West Marin, unless there's anything to add there. And then for Central Marin, we asked Central Marin if they'd like to present on their proposals, but they declined because the proposals are all recurring projects, and you have heard them all previously. So you'll note core proposals include the Camp Tamarancho project, Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break, the Defensible Space Alliance, and evacuation route work. And that's it. Those are all 5 zones. We got through all of it.
Thank you.
And then my last slide here is next steps. So we've gotten through a pretty heavy agenda today, and we've heard some direction. I think our next step on Marin Wildfire staff side is to follow up with the Ops Ad Hoc and the chair and vice chair, and make sure we've received all of your input, and we incorporate your input into our list of projects and proposals in our budget. We'll be meeting with the ATC again on the 28th to discuss, and then this group will meet again on May 1st. And at that point, we will have an action item, and that is to review updates and also recommend approval of the work plan and budget to the board. And then May 15th is the board meeting to discuss and consider approval of the work plan and budget. So we've got, quite a bit to do in the next couple of weeks, but we really appreciate all your input and discussion today. And that's it.
All righty, and we have not gone to public comment yet, so I know we had one earlier.
Mm-hmm.
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak, please raise your hand or press *9 if you're attending by phone. And it looks like we no longer have any public comment.
Time will take care of that. All righty. Do you need direction? What was our line here? I lost track. Staff words. So direction is that you've heard from us. We've got some action items, both short and long term. So we've got some work to do probably over the course of the next 6 months. And you'll be returning to us with the proposed budget on the 1st after you meet with ATC. Dan?
I would love on the 1st if we've received some feedback from Fire Safe Marin about, are they able to hold back on some of their hiring while we sort out with them their contract? I mean, what's the urgency? Because I'm just concerned if 6 months from now we're shifting gears and they've hired somebody.
Yeah, we will make sure they're aware of that. Okay, I don't think this requires any action. We have the feedback, and we can move on to the committee reports. Would you like to give us anything from ATC? No? Okay. No, go ahead.
Thanks, Jason. We met and we'll be meeting next week.
Okay, gotcha. All righty. Moving on to committee members' requests regarding future agenda items. I think we've got a couple future agenda items that we've already covered. Is there anything else from the group or anyone online? All righty. Hearing none, move to adjournment. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Thanks, staff, for all the good work.
Thank you, everyone.